With the conclusion of this week's episode that was dominated by Rin's kind of conclusion to the arc that she had going for this entire anime since we've been introduced to her, setting her off into a fascinating new territory with the help of Tohru, it honestly ends in a way that makes you look at Akito and Tohru as almost the same person, just with different outlooks and objectives in order to keep people together. Both of these characters have a fear of losing those that they cherish, but seemingly have different ways of doing it. So far, Tohru has been doing it with love and compassion, but is just as fearful of losing the Somas as honestly Akito probably is. But Akito is the type of person who uses violence and neglect and torment to keep them there so they can't run away. Yes, one is very much better than the other, but you can't argue the fact that both are afraid of losing the others. And that is fascinating to think about, and really going forward, I truly believe that there might be a way for Tohru to even salvage the heart as someone as corrupt and messed up as Akito, but I guess only time will tell. With only 2 episodes, Rin has already been established as in my top 5 favorite Fruits Basket characters as of right now. There's something about her character that just feels so well fleshed out, and in my honest opinion is the one that has touched me the most in terms of really feeling this sense of distraught. It's just so heartbreaking. I mean, Momoji is still up there, don't get me wrong, for just how messed up of a situation it is, but still, something about Rin and just someone who had to really push away kindness and compassion because she looks at herself as, if you give me this, I will cling on to it and I will use you, and people like me, they feed off of people like you who are kind. And something I've really been fascinated about was why she really had such a detest and hatred for someone like Tohru, someone she really hasn't met. Was it her face? Was it her personality? And it definitely was her personality, but it was the kindness that she feared, like with Haru, someone that she deeply loves and cares for and feels like she's no good for those types of people. She's broken, and if anything, she just wants to set them into a new path in life that they can enjoy, and someone like her who's as corrupt and twisted gets to be punished for what she probably considers a sin. I'm glad that they're actually touching upon these traits that a lot of people probably originally thought were just there to be an edge factor, something to give conflict, or it was a cliche. But as we can clearly see, everything does get retouched upon. Maybe it takes a season, but eventually you're gonna come back to those traits, like why Rin would just, someone she just met, she absolutely despises, and it's because that kindness is something that she can relate to, and she's fearful of herself and what she could do to that person, and that person should just live in their own world of happiness, almost being this envy, but realizing that she's to blame. It's such an interesting concept, and I honestly wasn't expecting too much more Rin content in this episode. I expected maybe another 5 minutes worth of content, not a half an episode and then a little bit towards the end. And the main reason was because typically Fruits Basket, they give you some pretty heavy stuff, and then they kind of ease you into something new, and then they'll go back to that content, and kind of goes it's a little bit of a swing. It goes back and forth, and we get to see it in a non-linear fashion. But by giving a half an episode just dedicated to the recovery of Rin, and reintroducing her to the hospital, to then just completely snapping on Tohru, to then just admitting to her feelings, something I don't think many of us probably expected, that she would literally break down and cry, asking for help because she feels so alone, she feels so afraid, and all she needs is a hug from her mother. And Tohru has been a motherly figure since basically day 1 of the show, and that was exactly what she needed. And I like the kind of like friendship that's brewing between these two, because even though they're so unlikely, because their goal aligns so well, it's just very interesting to see 2 unlikely souls get paired together. One who seems very cold and doesn't have much to say, but honestly has probably one of the kindest hearts as seen by what she was willing to sacrifice with her own life for the sake of others, and even people she just met pushed them away so she feels like she wouldn't corrupt them. There's a lot of kindness in her heart, and then of course there's a lot of kindness in Tohru's, but the difference between her is that she kind of like throws that cold icy persona out there and then really is very warm inside, where Tohru has a lot of warmth outside but has a lot of cold despair in her mind that she honestly doesn't realize that she needs to admit to, but slowly over the course of this anime is seemingly being broken out piece by piece. I mean, the fact that we actually got to see Tohru snap back at someone, not in a rage-filled way in the traditional sense, but rather saying, I absolutely will insert myself in this situation, I care for you, I care for everyone here, I'm going to fight this. It's something that you just don't expect to see from the girl we met in Season 1 to now seeing where she's at in Season 2, and the fact that she is starting to crack and break a lot, it's something that needs to happen. She needs to have her mind shatter and break and embrace these feelings, because for so long she gets these nightmares. She thinks of these flashbacks, stuff she thinks she doesn't really consider to be important anymore, but the fact that her mother said, "I will see you later," and never came back, that is something that haunts her. The fact that she feels abandoned, she feels like those that she cherishes will be ripped away. That's why she freaked out about her grandfather. It's why she freaks out about the Somas, people she just met, because she's worried that they will be ripped away and she will once again be left with nothing. And the fact that her grandfather's already gravely ill, like, that's not a lot to keep you going at the end of the day. So it's understandable where she's coming from, and I think that key aspect about her character, the fear of being alone, is going to be a very big aspect that's going to go forward with Akito's character, because clearly that's the same thing. That this curse, no matter how many years pass, no matter what is inhabited in the new Soma, that they're always going to be together. And I'm sure it wasn't always very corrupt and twisted. I'm sure it's just Akito just probably having his own emotional turmoil and things like that. But still, I think because there is such a relatability aspect to these two characters, despite you think they're being polar opposites, they just handled that fear of being alone in completely different ways. But honestly, you can see how someone could get like that, as if something just goes wrong and then it just snaps you and you feel like that's the only way, it causes this mental spiral to just completely take hold of you. I think that's going to be what's going to separate Akito and Tohru, but then also bring them together to hopefully mend the heart. Because as much as people may want to say, oh, Akito deserves to rot in hell and things like that, that's never what this series has clearly been about. It's about forgiveness and finding a new path in life. And even if, you know, people like Momoji's parents, they can't be a happy family forever, there's something about finding your new path, and maybe they can, or maybe just something else can happen here. There's always a new path where it's not just you punish the person, but you find a way to live happily in your life. And I'm curious if that's the direction they're going to go, because so far I've seen no indication that the solution is killing or burning Akito at the stake. Could it be a possibility? Sure, but it feels more like Tohru is supposed to mend all of their hearts, and in doing so, they can mend hers, and they can all overcome this struggle that they've all been facing, and even though they started off so different, they can truly become something similar by the end. It's very fascinating to me, and I think the relationship between Rin as well as Tohru is going to be very fascinating to follow now that there's this little duo, despite not really thinking it's going to happen. But the fact that I think someone who's actually reached the breaking point and someone who's about to reach the breaking point, I think they can do a lot for each other, both with the healing, but also the shattering and kind of understanding what to do with that information. I think there's a lot to unpack with this episode. There's a lot to really just love about the relationship between Rin as well as Tohru, but you also have to appreciate the more simplistic scenes, as there's actually some of the more unique comedy scenes in this anime. Like there's this one image that I absolutely loved where it looks like there were cardboard cutouts. There's just a lot of creativity when it comes to the joke scenes, and it didn't feel jarring, it didn't feel out of place. It felt like, you know what, we deserve this after everything that we saw last week and a lot of what we saw in this week's episode. And just the little moments like the fact that Tohru went out of her way to make jello because that's the food that Rin said she loves. It's very nice to see that these little moments, it makes it feel more human than it normally would. I feel like most authors, when there's these character traits, they would just focus on the big ones, not the simple things like what someone would want to eat inside a hospital. And the simple idea that she wanted jello, a very basic dessert, is something that really adds a lot of humility, a lot of humanity to her character. And I feel like most authors overlook that, and I think most anime studios refuse to adapt that because they don't think it's all that interesting. But I'm really glad to see both the manga as well as the studio, they go into that extra detail to really make sure every character feels like a person despite looking at them as someone who can change into an animal. Like, I love that scene where she turns into a horse and they're all freaking out in that little flashback. It's really great to see Fruits Basket continue on a great trend. It just feels like we're going up. Sometimes we sprint up and sometimes we have a nice slow and steady climb like we had with this week's episode, where with last week it was just skyrocketing up another 10 levels. Another fantastic episode, but of course, as always, let me know your thoughts and feelings down below, your favorite moment, and where you think it might go next week. Do let me know. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you happen to be new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.